An alarm pierced through the quiet morning, slicing the air like a blade. On the sunlit runway of Phoenix International Airport, all 27 aircraft of Western Skies Airlines stood frozen suddenly, and inexplicably, as if an invisible hand had locked the sky in place. Technicians scattered in confusion. Passengers crowded against the glass, panic rising in their eyes. News tickers flashed a single headline: Western Skies System Paralyzed, Cause Still Unknown. And in the middle of all that chaos, one man stood perfectly still. No shouting, no rushing, only standing with his hands in his pockets, his gaze sharp as steel. Evan Mitchell, 45 years old, calm enough to make the people around him shiver. No one knew the truth. Everything happening now had begun from a moment that seemed harmless. A moment when someone decided he was a man who did not belong. Exactly 31 minutes earlier, the desert wind swept across the parking lot, carrying thin clouds of golden dust around Evan's tall frame as he stepped out of his SUV. He moved without hurry, his steps carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had survived storms his entire life and knew exactly who he was. A charcoal grey cashmere sweater, dark denim, simple sneakers, no logos, no loud brands. Evan always preferred simplicity before a business trip, and today was more important than most, a meeting with Northbridge Capital in Seattle, a multi-billion-dollar deal that could push his company Orion Cyber Systems to a new summit. But the reason he never checked his watch was simple: the confidence of a man who had fought for every inch of power he held. No one handed it to him. He carved it out himself. His phone vibrated. Kayla assistant appeared on the screen. "You are heading inside now." Right, Kayla's voice was always sharp, precise, the same way she managed the CEO's schedule. "Yes, I am at the entrance." Evan replied, calm and controlled like a steady heartbeat. "Northbridge's files are fully updated. I sent you the behavioral analysis of Diane Fox, managing partner. She values your streamlined approach to workforce development." Evan let out a quiet breath of amusement, a cold metallic sound. "Good. I have a few surprises ready for them." Kayla hesitated. "And Evan, yes. Please stay calm if anything happens. Western Skies has been getting a lot of complaints lately." Evan lifted his chin slightly, his dark eyes reflecting the weight of someone who understood far more than he revealed. "I always stay calm." But deep down, he knew calm was something life had forced him to master long ago. The glass doors slid open, carrying him into the main terminal, cool air, mixed with the scent of floor wax, roasted coffee, and the restless energy of travelers. The sign for first-class priority check-in glowed ahead. Only 3 people were in line. Evan stepped forward. Then he felt it. The first glance. Slow, cold, evaluating. The check-in agent, Lindsay Baxter. Blonde curls, perfectly arranged, lightly applied makeup, grey eyes scanning from his simple sweater to his unbranded shoes. Her brows pulled together for a moment. Just a second, but enough to change the air around them. She did not ask good morning. She did not ask how she could help. She only stared at him, as if he had wandered into the wrong world. Next, her tone was clipped. Evan handed over his documents, polite and composed as always. First class Seattle. Lindsay picked up his ticket, paused, then looked at him again, longer and sharper. This time the suspicion was unmistakable. "Are you sure you are first class?" She pressed on the words, first class, like a blade. Evan raised an eyebrow, not surprised, only disappointed. "The ticket says what it is." She tightened her lips, tapping the keyboard. Then she suddenly pointed toward the economy line. You need to go over there. This line is for first class only." Evan's breath caught for half a second, but his face never changed. "I am in the correct line." Lindsay folded her arms. "The system is giving an error. Go over there." At that exact moment, a white man around 50 blue, suit-red tie, Thomas Keene, stepped forward. Lindsay lit up instantly. "Good morning, Mr. Keene. Ready for your first-class flight, sir. Please use the priority lane." The priority lane she claimed was malfunctioning just seconds ago. Thomas glanced at Evan with a dismissive sneer and walked past. The first plot twist of the day started right there, a moment that seemed small, but would soon unravel into a chain reaction that would crush an entire system. Evan did not argue. He did not need to. Life had taught him a truth: not every battle must erupt on the spot. At the right time, it erupts in a way that leaves the world silent. He took his ticket and walked away. But in Lindsay's eyes, what reflected was not just contempt. It was the misplaced confidence of someone who believed she understood the man in front of her. She had no idea that the man she dismissed was the only person in the entire airport capable of shutting down the system with a single command. She did not know that Western Sky's security infrastructure, every line of code, every access point, every encryption key had been built, approved and controlled by Evan Mitchell. She did not know he was not just a passenger. He was the man holding the airline's technological heart in the palm of his hand. But for now he stayed quiet, slow composed, because Evan Mitchell never used power for display. He used it to deliver blows that could bring systems to their knees. The security line was packed. Evan stood among the crowd, feeling the weight of glances brushing against him. Some were casual, some were curious, and one was heavy as stone. The white woman in a cream dress behind him crossed her arms, tilting her head, her blue eyes raking over him with irritation, as if he were an obstacle in her way. A wave of emotion passed through Evan, not anger, but a bone-deep exhaustion, the exhaustion of someone who had spent a lifetime proving what others never had to prove. They might not know who he was, but why did they always assume he was someone who did not belong? The speakers chimed, "Western Skies." Flight 207 to Seattle now boarding. He tightened his grip on his backpack strap. The next part of the storm was waiting. A part he could not yet know would force those who misjudged him to pay a price heavier than they could imagine. The second plot twist was coming second by second. From the moment Lindsay pushed him into the economy lane, fate had dragged all of them onto a different path. And only Evan, calm in the center of the storm, understood one truth. Some tempests only appear when someone foolishly believes you cannot summon them. He closed his eyes, let out a slow breath, stepped toward the security checkpoint, and as he handed over his boarding pass, everything began to move toward a direction no one saw coming. That was the moment the real storm formed. The security checkpoint glowed with cold white light, reflecting off the calm, unreadable face of Evan Mitchell. He handed over his boarding pass and ID to the young officer, a man around 25, still carrying the quiet eagerness of someone new to the job. Headed to Seattle, the officer asked politely. Evan nodded. The scanner beeped. The system confirmed no issues, no errors, no overbooked status. Just a simple verification like any other passenger. The officer smiled. Have a safe fly, but his sentence never finished. A sharp female voice sliced through the air. Hold on. The click of high heels hit the floor. Chloe Harper stepped in. The boarding gate agent, 28 years old, eyes sharp as a blade, carrying the kind of confidence that comes from spending years talking down to people she believed beneath her. She did not look at the young officer. She did not look at the boarding pass that was still glowing the words first class. She looked only at Evan, as if he were the sole anomaly in a line of perfectly acceptable travelers. "There is a problem with this ticket," she said, though her hands had not touched a single verification device. Her words sounded less like a concern and more like a pre-written verdict. The young officer stammered. "The system just cleared it." Chloe ignored him. She snatched the boarding pass from Evan with a quick, rough motion, as if taking hold of something she had already decided didn't belong. Evan's eyes darkened slightly. Not anger, not surprise, just a look that made the air feel thinner, like anyone standing near him had stepped onto cracking ice. "What is the issue?" he asked. Chloe glanced at him with the expression of someone who believed she had the authority to decide who belonged in privileged spaces. "I need to check with the supervisor." A broader figure approached Derek Sloan, 41 square, jaw-heavy shoulders, the walk of a man who enjoyed the power of giving orders to younger staff. When he looked at Evan, something flickered in his eyes, a mix of prejudice, suspicion, and that familiar, misplaced certainty that he was confronting someone who did not belong here. Sloan took the boarding pass and flipped it between his fingers as if testing whether it was counterfeit. "You are claiming this is a first-class ticket," Evan met his gaze. "I am not claiming anything. The ticket is." Sloan narrowed his eyes. "Our system is having issues. We need to check manually. Step aside so others can proceed." "Others?" A small word that dropped like a stone inside Evan's chest, though his expression did not move. Behind him, the murmurs began. A middle-aged white woman tugged her husband's arm. "Told you. He does not look first class." A young man sighed loudly. Always someone holding things up. Even the young officer from earlier hesitated, his voice small, as he tried to defend the scan. But the system already confirmed. Sloan raised a hand sharply. No hesitation. No shame in what he was doing. Evan stepped aside far enough to clear the line, close enough to witness every piece of unfolding bias. Chloe called the next passenger, a white man in his 30s navy suit, polished shoes. Scan beep cleared. No manual check. No questions. No delay. Only a bright smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Hargrove." Evan watched everything, every movement, every tone, every discrepancy, because he knew something they did not. The smallest evidence could become the bullet that destroyed an entire rotten system. After 3 minutes of so-called manual checking, which really meant Sloan chatting with Chloe about last night's game, he returned, wearing an exaggeratedly serious expression, as if delivering tragic news. "Bad news, Mr. Mitchell," he announced with a deep sigh, pausing dramatically. "This flight is overbooked." The words fell like a hammer. Evan did not react. He simply looked straight into Sloan's eyes. Overbooked. His voice was quiet. Deep, steady cold. Something the system did not report. Something he glanced at Chloe. Knew without ever checking. Chloe swallowed hard. A tiny gesture, but enough to show her confidence, had cracked. Sloan's did not. He crossed his arms, trying to stand taller. "We can move you to economy. We will refund the difference." A few people behind them snickered. One voice rose loudly. "See, I knew it." A coldness slid into Evan's chest. Not the sting of insult, but the familiarity of it. He had lived this scene too many times, wearing too many different shapes, never spoken outright, but always unmistakable. Evan looked at Sloan. I want to speak to your superior. Sloane raised an eyebrow. I am the supervisor. I want to speak to your superior. Evan repeated each word, carved clearly, leaving no space for denial. Sloane tensed. Chloe stepped back. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. That invisible line in the air, a boundary they had drawn to keep him out of a place they believed was not his. What they did not know was that he did not need to step in. He could tear the entire barrier apart. The tension swelled. A ring of passengers formed. Some recorded. Irritation spread like a spark catching dry leaves. Then another voice joined in. Is there a problem here? A man stepped forward in a black suit, silver nameplate gleaming. Frank Delaney, security officer. His hand rested near his belt, close to his taser, as if facing a threat instead of a paying customer with a valid ticket. Sloane immediately seized the chance to exaggerate. This passenger is causing disruption. He is refusing to cooperate with seat adjustments. Evan turned to Frank. His voice shifted no longer soft. It was sharp, cold, authoritative. I am not causing disruption. I am requesting the airline do what I paid for. Every other first-class passenger was allowed through without question. Only I was pulled aside. Frank hesitated. For the first time, doubt cracked his rigid posture. Evan looked him directly in the eyes. His gaze said everything. I am not who you think, and you are about to find out. Then the speakers chimed overhead. Western Skies, Flight 207 to Seattle boarding Lane 1 is now open again. Lane 1. The lane Lindsay claimed was malfunctioning. The lane Chloe insisted Evan could not use. The lane Thomas Keane walked through without a single issue. Chloe and Sloane exchanged a panicked look, as if the system itself had turned against them. Evan's lips curved slightly. Not a smile. A realization. Systems like people reveal the truth with the smallest crack. Sloane cleared his throat. Regardless, Mr. Mitchell will need to wait while we investigate further. No, Evan replied. One word, sharp as glass. I will board to the seat I paid for. Sloane and Chloe froze. Frank Delaney's hand tightened around the taser holster, not as a threat, but like a reflex from someone confronting something far beyond protocol. You cannot board until we finish checking, Sloane insisted, his voice beginning to tremble. Evan tilted his head, his eyes slicing the air. I can, he said. And you will let me, based on what Chloe blurted out. Evan's gaze darkened in a way that made the air shift. Based on the fact that none of you want to see what happens if I don't. Sloane laughed, a mocking, foolish, arrogant sound. Who do you think you are? And that was the single worst question asked that morning. A question that if Sloane knew the answer would have driven him to his knees. Evan stepped closer, standing face to face. His voice dropped low enough for only those nearby to hear. I am the one who wrote the security protocol Western Skies uses. Sloane froze. Chloe's mouth fell open. Frank blinked, rapidly stunned. Evan continued each word, striking like a nail sealing a coffin. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Orion Cyber Systems. I am the one holding the keys to your system. And if you continue to disrespect me, he leaned in slightly, his voice falling to a whisper, cold as the desert night. You will not just lose a passenger, you will lose the sky. Silence burst open around them. For the first time that morning, real fear crept into the eyes of people who believed they understood power. They did not know. They had only touched the surface of the iceberg. Because 20 minutes later, when the system collapsed, when every aircraft shut down, when the media swarmed the boarding area, they would understand his words were not a threat. They were a fact capable of destroying an entire airline with a single touch. Evan turned away, took the boarding pass from Sloane's frozen hand, and spoke no further. He walked past the barrier and headed straight for boarding lane 1, leaving behind the people who had just dragged themselves into a storm they never saw coming, a storm with a name: Evan Mitchell. Boarding lane 1 lit up green the moment Evan Mitchell approached, holding his boarding pass. The way a man holds a truth everyone else is trying hard not to see. Every gaze turned toward him, astonished, irritated, confused, unsure. None of them knew that the man stepping through that priority lane needed only 3 lines of code to plunge the entire airport into darkness. His footsteps sounded heavier as they crossed the deep red carpet of the first-class cabin, each one carrying the last reserves of patience from a man who had endured enough to see how far others were willing to tempt fate. Inside the cabin, soft golden lighting washed over the leather seats, creating an atmosphere of quiet luxury thick with entitlement. Each passenger was absorbed in their own world, reading financial newspapers, answering emails, sipping wine, until they saw Evan. And in that moment, the calm shattered. A white man with greying hair lowered his paper, narrowing his eyes. A woman in an expensive business dress frowned as if she had spotted something out of place in her curated living room. A young man in his mid-20s looked him over from head to toe with open judgment. No one spoke a word yet. The cabin trembled with one unspoken question. What is he doing here? Evan felt every glance. He had grown used to this. Far too used to it. Marissa Lane, the first-class lead attendant, approached with a mechanical smile, one created not from kindness, but from corporate training. "Excuse me, are you sure you are in the right seat?" She pressed on the word right until the air tightened. Evan handed her the boarding pass. "Seat 2A. Marissa checked. For a brief instant, surprise flashed in her eyes, quick and sharp, as if the system had betrayed her belief that he did not belong. "Yes, that is correct. This way." But as she spoke, her voice dried out, losing warmth, losing courtesy, leaving only the reluctant politeness of someone forced to serve a guest they did not want. Evan settled into seat 2. A placed his backpack beneath the seat, opened his laptop, yet he did not type. He simply observed. Observed the cabin the way a systems architect studies a framework revealing its fatal weaknesses. The seat beside him, 2B, was empty. A white woman around 48 stepped in, glanced at her seat, then at Evan, her expression sharp as needles. The tag on her luggage read, "Nancy Rollins. Designer clothes, overpowering perfume. Attitude even stronger than the scent." Nancy froze. She refused to sit. "Excuse me," she whispered to Marissa deliberately, loud enough for Evan to hear. "I want another seat." Marissa understood instantly. She looked at Evan, then back at Nancy, her voice soft, but filled with sympathy for the woman, not for the man being rejected. "Let me see if there is another seat for you." No asking why, no verifying, no hesitation, as if sitting next to Evan were a naturally unacceptable inconvenience. In only 20 seconds, Nancy was moved to seat 1D, a better seat. Evan glanced once in her direction. He said nothing, but inside him a quiet surge of electricity sparked not anger, but the clarity of a truth he had known all his life. They do not see me as a passenger. They see me as a problem. Marissa returned, stiff her unease, poorly hidden. "Would you like some water?" Not yet. Then I will come back to make sure you are comfortable." She spoke the word comfortable like she was talking to a difficult child. Evan did not respond. His eyes drifted to the window, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew people like Marissa, like Sloane, like Chloe, people who believed they were following rules, when in truth they were enforcing a system built on bias and privilege. A system for which Evan himself held the master key. If they had known that from the start, they would never have looked at him the way they did. But they had looked, and the price for that was coming. The overhead speakers crackled. "All passengers, please prepare for aircraft door closure." But the door didn't close. The aircraft didn't move. Time stretched thin like a rubber band, pulled to the breaking point. A passenger sighed. Late again. Another muttered, "Western skies has become terrible lately." Marissa paced, glancing repeatedly at Evan, as if he were the cause of the delay. Then suddenly, 2 security officers stepped into the first-class cabin. The entire room stopped breathing. Passengers turned, eyes locked on the officers, then locked on Evan. One officer asked Mr. Mitchell. His voice was cold and flat, as if reading charges. "Yes," Evan replied, eyes steady. "You need to come with us. There has been a report of disruptive behavior." The cabin fell into a harsh stillness. Nancy smirked from her new seat. Thomas Keene shrugged and looked out the window. A few passengers rested their chins on their hands, wearing the expression, "I knew it." But from seat 3C, an older man spoke up. "I have been here from the beginning. He did nothing." Dr. Harold Jensen, 62. The only person listening instead of judging. The officer did not even look at him. "Sir, we will handle this. Please do not interfere." Evan inhaled. Not from fear. From exhaustion, the kind that crashes into someone who has endured storm after storm until the rocks on the shore are worn to dust. He stood. Slowly. Firmly. Every movement controlled the posture of someone with enough power to crush the room, but no desire to do so unless absolutely necessary. "I will go," Evan said. "But you should remember this." He looked directly at the 2 officers, at Marissa, at Thomas, at Chloe, standing frozen at the cabin door. "Everything you are doing is being recorded." No one understood the weight of that sentence. They only saw a passenger being escorted off the plane. They did not know he was the last person they should have touched. As Evan stepped out of the aircraft, tension followed him like the echo of distant thunder. In the jet bridge, he glanced back into the first-class cabin through the glass. Nancy Rollins pouring wine. Thomas Keene opening his laptop. Marissa exhaling in relief. Chloe reporting over the radio that the situation has been handled. They all believed it was over. They did not know that the moment Evan stepped off the plane was the moment the countdown began. The door closed. Evan was escorted down a wide hallway, the harsh white lights sliding across metal walls like blades. A strange feeling ran down his spine. Not worry. Awakening. A machine inside him was preparing to rise. If they think I will bow to this, he thought they truly do not understand power. The officer's footsteps echoed. The security room door opened. A cold metal table, a faded plastic chair, worn like the apologies he had heard too many times in his life. Evan sat. No resistance, no speaking, because Evan Mitchell knew silence could be a weapon, the most effective weapon in the hands of someone who understood its danger. The officers began questioning him. Evan answered with the shortest replies possible, each word measured like a bullet chosen from a full magazine. When they paused to verify information, Evan leaned back. Outside from the gate speakers, a voice announced, We apologize. Flight 207 is experiencing a system malfunction. There is currently no estimated departure." Evan closed his eyes. A faint smile touched the corner of his lips. No one in the room understood the meaning of that smile. They only felt a chill slide down their spine. Because at the exact moment the flight was delayed at the Orion Cyber Systems headquarters in Chicago, a monitor lit up. The first 3 words appeared, "Protocol Atlas activated." The smallest moments are always the ones that trigger the greatest storms, and Western Skies had no idea the storm now swallowing their skies carried the signature of the very man they had just removed from first class. The cramped security room was washed in a pale, lifeless white light that reflected off the unsettling calm on Evan Mitchell's face. He sat upright, hands resting lightly on his thighs, no tension, no fear, no sign of resistance. He looked like a man quietly observing an earthquake he had triggered with his own hands. Minutes earlier, the moment Evan stepped into this interrogation room, Protocol Atlas had been activated from the Orion Cyber Systems headquarters. The security framework he had built over 12 years, fortified like a fortress and sealed as tightly as the bottom of a dark abyss, was already tightening around Western Skies Airlines without them realizing it. The 2 security officers, Delaney and Morris, had stepped out into the hallway, leaving Evan alone in the room. They believed they held the advantage. They did not know they were the ones trapped inside a maze Evan had designed long ago. In the Western Skies Command Center, just a few doors away, a team of technicians stared in panic as their screens flashed red over and over again. The check-in system is not responding. The boarding interface is failing across the board. Baggage scanners are offline. Aircraft are not receiving startup signals. Alarm tones echoed like death sirens. Amid the chaos, the head of engineering shouted, "Someone tell me what is happening." No one answered. No one dared. The LED panels pulsed red like warnings of incoming catastrophe. And one question spread through every terrified gaze. "Are we under attack on board flight?" 207, the first-class cabin, grew heavier with unease. The aircraft door remained open, yet the plane did not move an inch. Captain Mark Donovan stood in the cockpit, pale beads of sweat forming on his forehead. On a screen before him, a message appeared that he had never seen in 20 years of flying system lockdown authorization. Required contact Orion Cyber Systems. Mark stepped back, lips trembling. Orion Cyber Systems. The name hit his chest like a sledgehammer. Orion, the company responsible for the airline's entire security architecture. And Evan Mitchell, the face of the passenger, removed 12 minutes earlier, slowly surfaced in his memory. His stomach twisted. A cold realization crept up his spine. We touched the wrong man. In the first-class cabin, passengers were losing patience. Thomas Kean snapped, "How much longer? I have a major meeting." Nancy Rollins flung her hand in frustration. "This is first class and they are running it like a bus." Marissa Lane tried to stay composed, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. Another passenger spoke up. "I saw them pull someone off earlier." "Is that related?" Someone whispered. "What if they removed the wrong person?" The words froze Marissa in place for 1 full second. Only 1 second, but it was enough for the truth to slither into her mind, like a slow, cold serpent. Evan, the man she dismissed like a nuisance, the man Sloane forced into economy, the man Chloe blocked as if he were a threat. Now the skies were freezing, and she began to feel something she had not felt in years. Fear. Back in the security room, Delaney and Morris returned and placed a cold bottle of water in front of Evan. We reviewed the report. Someone said you made other passengers feel unsafe. Evan did not move, did not touch the water. Do you want to say anything? Morris asked. Evan lifted his head. His eyes were so still that they made the air tighten. I already told you. Everything you think you know is wrong. Delaney folded his arms. Wrong how? Evan tilted his head. His answer fell softly, yet struck like thunder. Wrong in thinking you have authority. Silence collapsed around them. Evan continued, Tell me, do you know who you just pulled off that plane? Delaney scoffed. A passenger who refused to cooperate. Evan met his eyes. Not with anger, not challenge, but with the look of a man who already knew a truth the others were still too small to grasp. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Orion Cyber Systems. Both officers froze. Morris stuttered, Orion. The airline system? Evan glanced at his watch. It has been more than 15 minutes, has it not? Delaney swallowed hard. You mean Evan leaned back, arms crossed. Did you think Western Skies just happened to shut down? No one breathed. No, I shut it down. The officers stepped back instinctively, as if a few inches of space could shield them from a truth too big and too dangerous to face. Evan continued, his voice sliding across the room like a blade dragging on glass, and it will not function again until I decide it will. At the Western Skies headquarters, Chief Executive Officer Richard Langford, 52 years old, was in a board meeting when an emergency call came in. He listened for a few seconds, and his face drained of color. All aircraft are locked. The system is not responding. Why can no one reach Orion? On the other end, someone stammered. Sir, we believe this is Protocol Atlas. Richard shot to his feet. Atlas. That protocol activates only when the board chairman demanded. What is happening? Richard responded in a cracked voice. Atlas only activates when Orion detects system abuse or a threat involving the highest clearance holder. And who is the highest clearance holder? The answer froze the room. The CEO of Orion. Evan Mitchell, a director, shouted, Where is he? On flight 207. That flight is grounded. My God, what have we done? Richard barked. Get me the security footage, all of it, now. At Phoenix Airport, a group of technicians sprinted toward the interrogation room. Sir, we have a massive problem. Delaney turned. What problem? The technician held up an iPad with trembling hands. Notifications flashed. All flights locked down, system restricted, critical access denied. Evan looked at them, eyes frozen steel. He spoke softly, each word landing like an execution order. Keep treating me like a criminal. When your CEO runs in here on his knees, begging it will already be too late. Morris stepped back farther. Delaney collapsed into a chair. Silence suffocated the room. Then the door burst open so violently it slammed into the wall. A man stumbled, in breathless face, flushed tie crooked. Evan Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell. I need to speak with you immediately, Richard Langford, the Chief Executive Officer of Western Skies Airlines. The most powerful man in the company, now looking like someone staring at the ruins of his own future. Evan did not rise. He did not look surprised. He simply studied Richard for 1 second, a single second, long enough to measure the depth of the man's regret. Then he spoke. Well, the person who needed to show up has finally arrived. Richard swallowed hard and stepped forward. Mr. Mitchell, we made a grave mistake. Evan tilted his head. A grave mistake. His voice remained soft, but the softness dragged the room downward like a weight sinking into the deep. You call abusing a passenger, discriminating against him, and throwing him off a plane without cause a grave mistake. Richard lowered his head. I apologize, but please allow us to speak privately. Evan stood, slowly, deliberately. Both officers, both technicians, and Richard himself stepped back, as if pushed by a force they could not see. Evan walked toward the door, paused for one beat, then turned to Richard. You have exactly 3 minutes. If not, these skies will stay closed for 3 days. Richard went pale. Yes, of course. 3 minutes. 3 minutes, Evan stepped into the hallway, and in that moment, the entirety of Western skies understood one thing. They had crossed the one man on Earth, capable of bringing an entire airline to its knees with a single command. The storm was becoming a superstorm. The 3rd floor of Phoenix International Airport, the emergency meeting level was built like a glass fortress, thick walls, warm yellow lights, casting long shadows, and a dark wood conference table sitting in the center, like a stage reserved for the powerful. Now in that room, 2 men entered, not as host and guest, but as 2 opposing forces of a storm about to collide. Richard Langford, Chief Executive Officer of Western Skies Airlines, breathed heavily, like someone who had sprinted a long distance. Evan Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer of Orion Cyber Systems, walked in with the calm of a man holding the blade in the negotiation. The others hurried in behind them. Chloe Harper from the boarding gate, Derek Sloan, the boarding security supervisor, Marissa Lane, the first-class attendant, Frank Delaney, the security officer, 2 company lawyers, and 3 other senior executives. No one spoke. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. The air was thick, heavy, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioner, like the dying heartbeat of a collapsing system. Richard gestured for Evan to sit, but Evan remained standing. You wanted to talk, his voice low and steady. I am listening. Richard adjusted his tie, a habit he had whenever the pressure grew too high. Mr. Mitchell, first allow me to extend our deepest apology. Stop. Evan cut him off with a single word. Richard froze. That is not why I am here, Evan continued. I do not need apologies. I need the truth. The sentence locked the entire room in place. Several executives darted nervous glances toward Sloan and Chloe. The 2 of them shrank into themselves, as if trying to disappear before truth dragged them into the light. Richard swallowed hard. We reviewed footage from 5 different cameras, and what Evan asked, head tilted slightly, eyes fixed on him. Richard breathed deeply, and everything clearly shows the passenger was treated improperly, entirely improperly. Chloe blurted out, I was just following procedure. Evan turned to her. Which procedure? Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sloan hurried to intervene. Voice cracking. The system reported an error. So we had to check in now. Evan's tone remained soft, but the edge beneath it gleamed like steel. I wrote that system. I know when it fails, and I know when people fail. Sloane's face drained of color. Richard stepped closer to Evan, speaking in the tone of a man negotiating with a deity who could either lift or sink his empire. We will correct this. We will compensate. We will rebuild our training process from the ground up. We only ask that you restore the system. Evan looked straight into his eyes, the light reflecting in them sharp as a blade. No. One word, light as a feather, heavy as a hammer. Richard recoiled as if struck. There is no correction, Evan continued. This is not a matter of a few employees making mistakes. This is a broken system. Silence hit the room like a quake. Evan set his backpack on the table, opened it, and pulled out a thin laptop. He clicked on a video, the recording of the moment he was pushed into the economy lane. The bluish glow from the screen lit Chloe's face, exposing every second of bias, every raised eyebrow, every mocking tone. This is not a mistake. This is an attitude, Evan said. Then he opened the second video, Marissa moving Nancy Rollins to a better seat without a single question. The third video, Sloane instructing him to move to economy. The fourth, Delaney advancing on him as if he were a criminal. A chain of small moments that stitched together revealed a system rotting from inside. No one moved. No one dared cough. No one could deny what they were seeing. Richard clasped his hands, trying to steady his voice. "Mr. Mitchell, what do you want us to do?" Evan closed the laptop. The click of the lid felt like the final bolt sealing their fate. 6 things, he said, deep and slow, or the system stays frozen. Permanently. The Western Skies executives inhaled sharply. Their eyes widened in the way of those who finally understood that the man before them absolutely could do what he threatened, and worse, would do it if necessary. Evan raised one finger. First, immediate termination, no compensation, no record cleanup for every employee directly involved. All eyes turned toward Chloe, Sloane, Marissa, and Delaney. They stood motionless, caught like animals in a spotlight. Chloe burst into tears. Sloane's skin turned ash-gray. Marissa covered her mouth, her hand trembling. Delaney's legs wobbled beneath him. Evan continued without pause and raised a second finger. Second, mandatory training for all staff, from pilots to attendants, supervisors to baggage handlers on anti-discrimination, unconscious bias, awareness, and incident management. He raised a third finger. Third, establish a Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer with C-level authority, empowered to suspend any employee at any time. Richard swallowed hard. That position would hold power equal to a Chief Financial Officer or Chief Operating Officer. Evan raised a fourth finger. Fourth, make public the entire service protocol, especially regarding first class and minority passengers, including an independent complaint mechanism. He raised a fifth finger. Fifth, a public apology across all Western Skies platforms for 48 hours. One executive snapped, "Impossible." That will Evan turned his gaze on him. It cut like a blade. "Will what make your reputation worse? Trust me." "It already is." The man fell silent, face flushed. Finally, Evan raised his sixth finger. Sixth, a contribution of $10 million to 3 racial equity foundations in the United States. A pen clattered to the floor, a single sharp sound like a verdict being delivered. Richard's lips parted, struggling to push out words frozen in his throat. You are asking too much." This is Evan stepped closer, just one step yet enough to make Richard instinctively retreat, half a step. "I am not asking." Evan growled softly, his voice dropping to a tone that felt like thunder trapped in a bottle. "I am giving you a choice." He turned his gaze to the entire room. Either Western Skies changes, or Western Skies dies. No one had ever heard a chief executive officer speak such words. But everyone in that room understood this was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. The Western Skies system was locked. It could not open without Orion's authorization. It could not be overridden. It could not be hacked. It could not be reset. It could not fly. And Evan Mitchell was the only man on Earth with the authority to say yes or no. One of the lawyers asked, voice trembling, If we agree to all terms, when will you restore the system?" Evan checked his watch. When the 6 people involved signed their termination papers, Chloe cried out in despair. "But I did not mean to. I just—" Evan did not look at her. "I saw the video. You meant it. Every bit of it." Sloane stepped forward, trying to retain some of the authority he once enjoyed, but his voice cracked. I have a family, children. I cannot be fired like this." Evan looked at him, as if reading a document of no relevance. "Unfortunate. You should have thought of them before treating me like garbage." Marissa broke into sobs. Delaney clenched his fists, trying to appear strong, though his legs shook violently. No one in the room dared claim innocence. They all knew they were wrong. But just how wrong they had never imagined. And never imagined the consequences would come from the very sky they worked for. Richard stared down at the table, eyes shut like a man awaiting execution. Then he looked up, defeated, yet resolute, like the final survivor of a sinking ship, forced to make the last decision. "Fine," he said, voice hoarse and fractured. "Western Skies accepts all 6 of your demands." Evan nodded. "Good." Then he pulled out his phone, tapped a single number. Someone answered immediately. "Tyler here." Evan said, "Begin recovery." They agreed. Tyler asked how long. Evan looked around the room, at the faces, drained, terrified, collapsing in on themselves. 30 minutes, he said, as calmly as if ordering lunch. Richard exhaled like a man returned from the edge of a cliff. But Evan was not finished. He stepped close to the chief executive officer of Western Skies, so close Richard had nowhere left to retreat. And Richard Evans said quietly, the words sinking straight into the man's chest. "Never mistake power for what you look like. Power is what you can make the world do." Then Evan turned and walked toward the door. The others instinctively parted, stepping aside without thinking. No one dared touch him. No one dared meet his eyes. Evan Mitchell walked out like a storm that had just passed, leaving behind a room full of people trembling as they realized they had underestimated the wrong man, and that mistake had forced the entire sky to kneel. 30 minutes. Just 30 minutes after the negotiation, Western Skies would spend years trying to forget the sky over America, began to tremble with strange signals, not engines, not metal, but the sound of a system rebooting piece by piece, layer by layer like a giant waking from a long forced sleep. In the airline's main command room, the LED indicators shifted from red to yellow, then from yellow to blue, and finally, a vivid green illuminated the entire control board. A technician shouted his voice, cracking between shock and relief, like someone dragged back from the edge of a storm. "We are back online. All systems are coming back up." The room erupted. Some slammed their hands on the table in joy. Some covered their faces and sobbed. Some collapsed into chairs like survivors who had just stumbled away from a cliff. But beneath the flickering light of every screen, a deeper fear crept through every pair of eyes. All of this happened because of one man. In the conference room, Richard Langford slumped into a chair, sweat soaking through his expensive suit. Marissa Sloane, Chloe, and Delaney sat hollow-eyed, staring into nothing. No one spoke. No one dared. They all knew their careers ended the moment Evan Mitchell walked out of that room. Chloe wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her voice cracked. The system really shut down just because of him. He could really stop everything. A director snapped. Not just stop. He owns the system's keys. If Mitchell wanted, we would be bankrupt in 1 hour. Another executive shook his head, voice trembling. "We are lucky all he demanded was our termination. It could have been much worse." Marissa collapsed forward, her hands covering her face. I never thought it would go this far. Evan did not need to speak another word. His silence alone had held the sky hostage for nearly 2 hours, long enough to put an entire airline at the edge of destruction. Across the terminal, Evan walked through the airport corridor at an unhurried pace. Not angry, not triumphant, simply calm. The calm of a man who understood that emotional outbursts never changed a system, but power did. His phone buzzed. Kayla, his assistant, was calling. "Are you all right? I heard the airport froze." "Was it yes?" Evan answered, voice low and steady. Atlas activated. The other end went silent for several seconds, long enough for Kayla to grasp the weight of those words. "So what did they do to you?" Evan stepped onto the escalator, the light catching the sharp lines of his face. "The things that usually happen. This time they picked the wrong person." Kayla sighed, frustration clear in her tone. "You should not have to deal with this." "Not ever." Evan simply replied, "It is fine. They learned their lesson." But beneath that voice was something even Kayla, the person who understood him best, could not hear. Something like an old scar stirred by the desert wind. Meanwhile, the first tremors hit the media. A passenger had recorded Evan being escorted off the plane. Another captured Sloan, confronting him with false authority. Another filmed Chloe blocking him, despite his ticket clearly showing first class. The videos hit Twitter, and the algorithm spread them like wildfire. The first hashtag appeared, passenger 207. Then the second Western Skies discrimination. Then the third. This was the one that truly made the airline tremble, who is Evan Mitchell? Someone posted a photo of Evan speaking on a cybersecurity stage. Someone else found a Forbes article about him. A tech journal linked to an old headline, "Orion Cyber Systems deploys new security infrastructure for Western Skies Air from 2 years ago." And within 30 minutes, the entire internet knew the truth. The man Western Skies kicked off a plane was the chief executive officer of the company controlling their system. The media storm began forming at the same time. The aircraft systems were crawling back to life. Back at Phoenix Airport, Evan sat in the first-class lounge after being formally invited inside. Through the glass, Western Skies aircraft rolled slowly across the tarmac, propellers spinning back to life planes, lifting off as if the sky was being unlocked piece by piece. Evan looked out at the runway with no pride, no anger. Only quiet clarity. The clarity of someone who understood something the world often ignored. True power is not the ability to force people to bow, but the ability to make the entire system change because of you. Kayla called again. Northbridge Capital messaged, "They can move the meeting to tonight or tomorrow. Which do you prefer?" Evan answered softly, "Tomorrow. Today there is still some cleanup to do." "Cleanup, yes. The sky." Kayla exhaled. "I will arrange everything." On the 3rd floor, Richard Langford sat motionless. He had just signed the termination papers for 4 employees and 2 security staff. The remaining leaders looked at each other in fear, too shaken to say a word. Richard stared at the paper, voice hoarse. "Mitchell, who is he? How can one man, a technical director," replied, face pale as ash. "He built Atlas. He is the only one with the authority to lock the entire system. That means only Evan Mitchell can reopen the sky." The room fell silent. As Richard struggled to steady himself, a communications officer rushed in, face drained of color. The PR crisis hotline is calling. The news is out. Evan Mitchell is trending #1 nationwide. Richard shot up. The staffer held out their phone with trembling hands. The news is calling this the biggest PR disaster in American aviation history. Another director groaned. We racially profiled the one man capable of shutting down the entire airline. My God, in the lounge. Evan watched the television mounted above him. A breaking news banner flashed across the screen. Breaking Western Skies experiences nationwide system failure. Sources indicate connection to a passenger removed from a Phoenix flight. Below it, a smaller line crawled across. CEO of Orion Cyber Systems reportedly involved. Evan took a sip of tea, his eyes settling into a quiet, stone-like calm. Not anger, not pride, just the familiar truth in life. To change anything, you must be willing to pay the price. And he was. On social media, someone posted the video of Evan being escorted off the plane with the caption, "This is how Western Skies treats a black first-class passenger." Another person replied, "Do not jump to conclusions. Maybe he really caused trouble." Then the next comment erased everything with Evan Mitchell, CEO of Orion Cyber Systems. He designed their security system. Another user wrote, "And now their entire fleet is grounded. Tell me again who was causing trouble." The internet erupted with outrage, sarcasm, fury, and disbelief, like a snowball rolling off a mountain, growing larger, unstoppable. At that moment, Richard entered the lounge, panting like a man who had run through a sandstorm. He found Evan sitting alone, staring across the runway. Richard approached. "Mr. Mitchell." Evan did not turn. "The systems are restored," Richard said, "and I want to thank you for giving us a chance to correct this." Evan set down his cup and finally turned his head, his gaze deep, like a windless midnight lake. "Do not thank me. Just do not repeat it." Richard nodded rapidly. "Never. I swear it." Evan stood, took his backpack. Richard stepped back instinctively, like one wrong move might shut the system down again. Before leaving the lounge, Evan said, "Richard, yes, you should hold a press conference and tell the truth." Richard hesitated. "We will try." "Not try," Evan interrupted. "Do it." Then he walked out, calm, steady, never looking back. The people in the lounge watched him go like watchers, staring at a streak of light crossing a dark sky. One whispered, "He does not just have power, he is power." Evan stepped onto the elevator, heading toward the VIP concourse, the Phoenix sunlight washing over his determined face. In the distance, the intercom rang out. "Western Skies apologizes for this morning's unusual disruption. We are restoring all operations." Evan closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and in that moment, he knew a larger battle waited ahead. Because this story was never just about a first-class seat, never just about an airline. It was about an entire system that had grown far too comfortable, placing him below where he deserved to stand. And now they were about to learn one truth: Evan Mitchell never accepts the place others assign him. He creates his own place, even if he has to break the sky to do it. That morning, before the Phoenix sun had even reached its peak, an unseen wave had already begun rising across America. National media tech news sites, corporate power analysts, and bloggers specializing in executive influence all turned their attention toward a single man, Evan Mitchell. Yet, while the entire country speculated, raged, cheered, or wondered, Evan sat alone in the VIP lounge, his eyes drifting beyond the thick glass, where Western Skies aircraft were slowly returning to normal operations, as if nothing had happened. Beneath that calm gaze, another wind stirred in his chest, not anger, not triumph, but a heavy truth. Once again, I have to prove something others never have to prove. At Western Sky's headquarters in Dallas, senior executives crowded inside an emergency meeting room. No one looked composed anymore. Suit jackets tossed over chairs, ties, loosened hair disheveled from stress. At the head of the table, Richard Langford stared at a massive screen where the news updated by the minute. A national broadcast flashed a bold red banner. Breaking news, Chief Executive Officer of Orion Cyber Systems removed from Western Sky's flight moments before airline system collapses. The reporter spoke quickly, urgency in every word. We are working to confirm whether there is a direct link between the discriminatory treatment of the Orion CEO and the nationwide shutdown Western Skies experienced for nearly 2 hours. A PR director broke into tears. This is it, we are finished. There is no way to save this. No, Richard slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. Quiet, we are not finished. Not if we act correctly. Every eye turned to him. At that moment, Richard's phone vibrated. The caller ID glowed, Evan Mitchell. The room fell silent. Richard answered his hand, trembling his voice, struggling to remain calm. Mr. Mitchell, I am heading to Gate 17. Evan said, his voice steady and heavy enough to crush whatever faint hope lingered in the room. Here is my advice. Hold a press conference within 1 hour. And tell the truth, Richard swallowed. We will. I swear it. Do not swear to me, Evan replied, his tone turning cold. Swear to your passengers. The call ended. The room felt like it had been submerged in ice water. Richard stood. Prepare the press conference. Now. A director asked, panicked. But what do we even say? Richard looked at their pale faces, then said quietly, Say exactly what happened. Silence fell deep and suffocating. No one could believe Western Skies would publicly confess racial discrimination. But they also understood one thing clearly. If they lied, Evan would know. And the sky would go dark again. While Western Skies scrambled for the most important press conference in its history, Evan stepped out of the lounge. The Phoenix desert wind brushed against his jacket, carrying heat and dust. As he crossed the wide concourse, a reporter caught sight of him. A young woman sprinted toward him, a camera operator close behind. Mr. Mitchell, Evan Mitchell, can you comment on? Evan looked at her for 1 second, that stopped her cold, as if she had touched an electric fence. I will speak when it is time. Then he walked away. That single sentence sent every nearby reporter surging toward him, microphones raised like a forest of antennas. Did you shut down the Western Skies system? Were you discriminated against before the incident? Did you activate the Atlas protocol? Did Western Skies threaten you? Evan didn't answer. He simply walked through them the way someone walks through a revolving door. They did not know he was saving the story for precisely the right moment. And when that moment came, it would explode like fireworks in the night sky. Meanwhile, passengers at gate 207 were still buzzing. I saw him being escorted out. He did nothing wrong. That was blatant discrimination. That guy was the Orion CEO. Is that why the airline shut down Nancy Rollins? The woman who refused to sit beside Evan sat hunched in her chair, face drained of color. Her mind replayed her own words, whispered with quiet cruelty. I do not want to sit next to him. Now that she knew Evan's true identity, her hands shook violently. I insulted the man who controls their entire system. Nancy could not look at anyone. She clutched her purse, head bowed, shoulders trembling like someone freezing in the middle of an Arizona summer. No one pitied her. No one sympathized. Everyone looked at her with the same thought. You brought this on yourself. At the boarding gate, Chloe Harper leaned against the wall, pale, shaking, occasionally choking back small sobs. A single thought spiraled in her mind. I am going to lose my job. I am going to lose everything. She remembered Evan's eyes when he asked which rule and how she could not answer. She remembered the moment he said, I built that system, and the feeling of her heart plummeting. Now she was not just afraid of unemployment. She feared being condemned publicly for years. In the age of social media, a stain like racial discrimination never disappears. Near the security zone, Officer Frank Delaney stood alone, hand resting near the holster, where his taser sat silently. A single thought echoed through him. I treated the CEO of our security provider like a criminal. Frank breathed heavily. He had handled hundreds of incidents. He once believed he understood authority. But that morning he had encountered true authority. Not the authority of force, not the authority of a badge, but the authority of someone who held the world through intellect, technology, and vision. And Frank realized he had never stood lower in his life. Inside the cockpit of Flight 207, Captain Mark Donovan sat frozen, staring at the screen that had just turned green again. He rubbed his forehead, guilt drowning his chest. He was the one who said, You are compromising the safety of my crew. Now he understood. The unsafe person was himself. I removed from the plane the only man who could start it. Dear God, his hands trembled on the controls. Even though the system was restored, he was not ready to take off. Not because of the aircraft, because of himself. Meanwhile, national media boiled over. A cybersecurity expert was brought on air. If Evan Mitchell was mistreated, Western Skies could face the largest wave of lawsuits in aviation history. Another journalist added, Mitchell is not a normal passenger. He built Atlas. With a single command from Orion, the entire airline can be paralyzed. A commentator said bluntly, and they treated him like an intruder. Unbelievable. Finally, Western Skies released the press conference time 11 o'clock. The entire country waited. Cameras assembled. Reporters gathered outside the headquarters. On Twitter, a journalist's post skyrocketed in engagement. If Western Skies apologizes truthfully, it will be the first time in U.S. aviation history that an airline admits racial discrimination on national television. At the airport, Evan left the VIP lounge and headed toward Gate 17. His steps were slow, not focused on the world around him, but on his own thoughts. No one saw it. No one saw the exhaustion running through him like an old wound reopened. No one saw the memories rising, the times he had been underestimated, dismissed, treated as if he didn't belong. No one saw the nights he spent in a basement, working until 3 in the morning, building a system Western Skies now depended on. No one saw the battles he fought just to stand where he stood today. Evan reached a large window overlooking the runway. A Western Skies plane was taking off. Sunlight glinted against the metal body. Evan murmured softly, "Fly, and hope this time the sky treats people more fairly." Behind him, a cluster of reporters whispered, "That is him right. It is Mitchell, record." But Evan did not turn. He did not need the spotlight. He did not want to be a hero. He wanted the truth. And now the truth was surfacing layer by layer. 10 minutes later, his phone vibrated. A message from Richard. We are preparing for the press conference. I will say everything you demanded." Evan stared at the message for a long second. Then he slipped the phone into his pocket. Outside, the sky grew brighter, and Evan Mitchell knew the battle that began that morning was far from over. It had only just begun. 11 o'clock in the morning. The entire United States felt as if it had stopped breathing. The plaza in front of Western Skies, Airline's headquarters in Dallas, was surrounded by dozens of broadcast vans, hundreds of reporters, and a forest of microphones, cameras, and cables sprawled across the ground like a web. The air was packed with whispers, blinking lenses, and eyes burning with anticipation for a moment no airline in history had ever dared to face a public press conference about racial discrimination, with the victim being the chief executive officer of the company that controlled the airline's entire technological system. The large glass doors of the headquarters opened. Richard Langford stepped out. Instantly flashes burst around him like daylight fireworks. Richard stared into the sea of cameras. His face was pale with exhaustion, but his eyes carried a heavy acceptance, like a man holding a truth too large to hide. He knew this moment would enter the history books. He also knew it would burn his career to the ground if he misspoke a single word. A female reporter shouted, "Mr. Langford, does Western Skies discriminate?" Another voice pushed forward. "Who is responsible for shutting down the entire airline this morning?" A man from the back yelled, "Did you mistreat Evan Mitchell, the name?" Evan Mitchell exploded like gasoline hitting a flame. Reporters shouted over one another. Richard reached the podium, placing both hands on it to steady himself. He looked down at the printed statement on thick white paper, a statement he knew would tear Western Skies open before the entire nation. He drew a deep breath and began. This morning, Western Skies Airlines experienced a critical system failure that disrupted operations nationwide. He paused. A wave of tense breathing rippled through the crowd. After reviewing the situation, we confirm that the cause was not a technical malfunction. Cameras lifted higher. Pens froze mid-sentence. The air turned solid. The cause originated from human failure, specifically from the way Western Skies staff treated one of our passengers. Whispers erupted like distant thunder. Richard lifted his head and looked directly into the center camera, as if staring into the eyes of millions. That passenger was Mr. Evan Mitchell. Chaos broke loose. You admit it. Are you saying your staff discriminated? Was Mitchell really removed from the plane? Are you blaming your employees? Richard raised a hand, signaling silence. His voice dropped heavy with shame and resolve. I will be clear. Yes. Western Skies mistreated Mr. Mitchell. We violated procedure. And yes, there were signs of discriminatory behavior. The atmosphere detonated. Reporters reacted like they had been struck by lightning. No one expected a major airline to speak the words discriminatory behavior on national television. Richard continued. We reviewed all camera angles. Mr. Mitchell was questioned solely for his appearance. He was redirected to the economy line without cause, denied boarding despite holding a first-class ticket. Security was called on him for disruptive behavior, even though he did nothing wrong. A female reporter covered her mouth. A male reporter dropped his pen. Someone whispered, "This is not just discrimination. This is brand suicide." Richard's voice grew heavier as he spoke the next line. Western Skies offers our deepest apology to Mr. Mitchell. Then he began reading the commitments. We will fulfill the 6 requirements requested by Mr. Mitchell. He listed them one by one. the firings of 6 employees, mandatory anti-discrimination, training the creation of a Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, a public service protocol, a public apology, and a $10 million donation. Reporters exchanged stunned looks. A financial news live stream displayed the headline, "Western Skies Accepts All Conditions." Set by Evan Mitchell, a commentator said he did not sue, he did not shout, he simply used power correctly. Meanwhile, far away in a quiet corner of Phoenix International Airport, Evan Mitchell watched the press conference on a large lounge screen. No one recognized him. No one dared approach him. He stood with arms crossed the glow of the screen, casting shifting bands of light and shadow across his face, highlighting the contrast between power and pain. When Richard spoke, the words discriminatory behavior, Evan inhaled softly a single breath, but a breath that came from reopening an old wound. He was not happy, not proud, not satisfied. He was simply tired. Tired of proving he belonged where others walked without permission. Tired of apologies that only arrived once people discovered who he was. Tired of watching a system change, not because it understood what was right, but because it feared the power he carried. Nearby, a young service worker froze when she realized who he was. "Oh my God, you are him." Evan turned toward her. Not cold, not distant, but with a look that told her he did not want to be seen as a hero, nor as a victim. Just a human being. The press conference ended with a line that instantly echoed across the nation. Richard said Western Skies changes today because one man stood up for the truth, and we accept responsibility for what we caused. But his words were drowned out by reporters shouting, "Evan Mitchell, where are you? We need your statement." Evan stood by the lounge window, gazing out at the sunlit runway. A Western Skies jet lifted off another, taxied towards the sky. Another climbed like a silver arrow into the morning light. Evan whispered, "The sky is open again." Good. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked away. Not toward the press room, not toward the cameras, not toward the headlines. He headed toward Gate 22, where the new flight booked for him was preparing to board. As he walked the wide hallway, people stepped aside instinctively, as if he emitted light. No one dared speak. No one dared block his path. Only the soft wheels of rolling suitcases and someone's nervous heartbeat echoed behind him. At the gate, a new employee with brown skin and a high ponytail greeted him. Her smile was not forced, not hesitant, not judging. It was a genuine smile. "Welcome, Mr. Mitchell. Boarding lane 1 is ready for you." Evan looked at her for a few long seconds longer than his usual reactions. Then he nodded. "Thank you." One word. But it was the first word he had spoken all morning that carried no shadow. As Evan stepped through the boarding lane, a headline began spreading across America. The man who forced Western Skies to overhaul its entire policy refused to attend the press conference. He stays silent. And that silence is what the nation is listening to. A reporter said on live television, "Some people need a microphone to be heard. Others only need a single action to bring an entire system to its knees." Evan Mitchell boarded the new aircraft. This time, no one dared question whether he belonged in first class. No one dared doubt him. No one dared judge him, because they all knew they were not just looking at a passenger. They were looking at the man who forced the sky itself to reopen that morning. The aircraft rolled toward the runway. When it lifted off, the Phoenix wind swept across the metal fuselage, carrying one simple truth. Sometimes, to open the sky, all it takes is one person who refuses to accept anything less than the right to fly. The new aircraft Evan Mitchell boarded shot off the Phoenix runway like a silver arrow and climbed into a clear, quiet sky. Sunlight streamed through the window and washed his face in a soft golden glow. But behind that peaceful light was a storm rising across the country beneath him. Open any social media platform, any news channel, step into any newsroom, and his name appeared everywhere as if he were the center of gravity for the entire United States. Yet, Evan didn't watch a single second of it. He sat in first class, buckled his seatbelt, leaned his head against the headrest and closed his eyes. Not to rest, not to escape, but because in this moment, with the sky finally calm, he could hear more clearly the echoes life had been sending him. Echoes he had tried to silence for years. On the ground, the media storm detonated. In New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, the prime-time news programs dedicated half their broadcasts to western skies, and Evan Mitchell. On national television, the anchor spoke with tight urgency. Today, for the first time in American aviation history, a major airline admitted on live broadcast to discriminatory treatment. The affected individual, Evan Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer of Orion Cyber Systems. Footage appeared of Evan being escorted off the plane footage of the Western Skies shutdown footage of Richard Langford's press conference. The anchor continued. The biggest question America is asking now is this: what happens when the person being discriminated against is the one holding absolute power over the system? A cybersecurity expert answered. What happens is the entire system pays the price. Online millions clashed in heated debate. Those defending Evan said, "This is the only way to force a discriminatory system to change, and if it wasn't Evan Mitchell, it would have been buried." And they're apologizing out of fear, not remorse. Those criticizing Evan insisted no one should have this much power, and isn't this technological retaliation? Immediately someone countered, he didn't shut down the country. He shut down Western Skies, and they deserved it. Comments rose like waves crashing into each other. Evan Mitchell, the man who only wanted to fly to Seattle for a meeting, had suddenly become a symbol in a nationwide conversation about power discrimination, justice, and technology. At Phoenix Airport, as the press conference concluded, reporters swarmed every witness they could find. A journalist cornered Nancy Rollins, the woman who refused to sit next to Evan. "Do you want to comment on your request to change seats?" Nancy trembled, lips pale from stress. "I did not know who he was." Her voice cracked. I didn't think the reporter shot back. "If he were not the CEO of Orion, would you still have asked to move?" Nancy could not answer. Camera flashes lit her face, exposing a truth she could no longer bury. She did not move because of who he was. She moved because of what he looked like, and that was the heart of the problem. The interview spread at lightning speed. Within 2 hours, Nancy became the symbol of digital age shame. At the boarding gate, Chloe Harper was surrounded by reporters like vultures circling a cooling body. "Did you question his ticket because of his race? Did you know who he was? Do you regret it?" Chloe broke down, covering her face. "I wasn't thinking anything. I was just following procedure." A reporter shot back. "What procedure?" "The procedure of devaluing first-class black passengers." Chloe collapsed. The internet clipped the moment and tied it to a rising hashtag, the gatekeeper Chloe. She was criticized, mocked, turned into memes, and placed under the burning lens of public outrage. Yet none of them knew the moment Evan said, "I wrote that system myself," her entire understanding of authority shattered. She had never been prepared for this. Not even close. In the Western Skies office, the most broken person was Sloane. He sat in a small room, head in his hands. An HR worker handed him his termination papers. Sloane stared at them like a death sentence. "I worked here 19 years, he whispered, voice hollow. 19 years, and it all ends because of one passenger." The HR worker sighed. Not because of one passenger. Not because you wronged one person, but because you wronged many until you finally met the right one. Sloane went silent. His eyes reddened. He understood. Too late. Evan did not destroy his career. Sloane did. Evan only turned on the lights. On the new flight, Evan opened his eyes when the flight attendant approached with a soft, genuine tone. "Mr. Mitchell, what would you like to drink?" Evan answered. "Just water." She returned with a glass. No intrusion, no judgment, no suspicion about whether he belonged in first class. And that small moment made something ease in his chest. Not because they treated him with reverence, but because they treated him correctly. Not because he was the chief executive officer of Orion, but because he was a passenger. In the cockpit, the captain whispered to the first officer, "That's him, isn't it?" "Yeah, I think so. I heard he can shut down an entire airline in 10 minutes. Maybe. I think maybe we should thank him." The first officer glanced over. For what, the captain looked at another Western Skies jet lifting into the sky. For forcing us to treat people better. At 32,000 feet, Evan opened his laptop not to read the news, not to answer emails, but to check a report from Orion. A message from Chief Technology Officer Tyler Rodriguez popped up, Atlas fully restored. No errors. Behavioral logs show Western Skies attempted to override 3 times. Evan frowned and typed, "Did they break through any security layers?" Tyler responded, "No, Atlas cannot be broken. Only you can unlock it." Evan closed the laptop. This was why Atlas existed, to protect the system from misuse, whether external or internal. But this morning, for the first time ever, Evan had used it for himself. And the feeling was not triumph, but something heavier. He wondered, if I were not Evan Mitchell, would the truth come out? If I did not have this power, would they apologize? If I were just an ordinary passenger, what would have happened? Evan closed his eyes. The answer pierced him like a cold needle. They would have trampled him, then trampled the next person, and no one would know. That truth hurt him the most. Not the incident, not the shutdown, but the invisible system that had existed for decades without being questioned. And Evan understood, I did not just change an airline by accident. I just triggered a national conversation. As the plane approached Seattle, the sky below turned amber clouds, drifting like slow breaths after a storm. Evan looked out the window. Below was the city where he would meet Northbridge Capital the next morning. They wanted to invest $500 million in Orion, a large sum. But after this morning, Orion was no longer just a cybersecurity company. It was the name of the man who forced an airline to kneel and rethink its entire culture. Investment would grow, influence would grow. A new message appeared on his phone, media outlets requesting exclusive interviews. CNN, ABC, CNBC, Time, Forbes all want you. Evan turned off the screen. No reply, no reaction. He would only speak when his words would create real change, not drama, not revenge. As the plane descended, the flight attendant announced, "We will be arriving in Seattle shortly." Evan fastened his seatbelt. He did not look around. He did not pose as a hero. He did not pretend humility. He simply breathed. In that quiet moment, a truth rang inside him like a deep bell. Power is not for retaliation. Power is for repair. And he sensed deep in his chest that this morning didn't close a chapter. It opened a larger, broader, more dangerous one, a chapter he never expected to enter, becoming a voice for those who could not stop the sky to make the world listen. From Phoenix to Dallas to Seattle, the sky had changed today. Not just for Western skies, not just for the airline industry, but for the entire nation. And Evan Mitchell, the man who once built Orion in a damp basement, was becoming the symbol of a far greater reform. Not because he wanted to, but because he could no longer avoid it. Seattle welcomed Evan Mitchell with a thin veil of mist floating in the air, the glass towers reflecting the soft lavender sky of early morning. When the plane touched down, the first-class cabin fell into an unusual silence. No one spoke a word, yet everyone knew they were sharing the space with a man who had shaken an entire airline industry in a single morning. Evan rose slowly and pulled his backpack over his shoulder. No one blocked his way. No one questioned him. But something different spread through the cabin. Something unmistakable, genuine respect, not forced. He stepped out of the aircraft and into the jet bridge. The white lights above cast shifting shadows across his face, carving the silent silhouette of a man who had just walked off a battlefield. Kayla was already waiting at the gate. She hurried toward him, breath quickened. "Are you all right?" Evan nodded. "I am. But this morning was more than I wanted." Kayla sighed and pressed a hand to her forehead. "You know, the entire country is talking about you, right? Western Skies is in panic mode. Other airlines are calling emergency meetings. CNN wants to book you tonight." Evan glanced at her. "I am not doing interviews. Not yet." Then when the story stops being about me, Kayla paused, then smiled, understanding fully. Evan had never wanted to be a symbol. He only wanted the truth. And truth is something that cannot be buried. The meeting with Northbridge Capital. The conference room on the 45th floor of Northbridge Capital overlooked the glittering silver surface of Elliott Bay. When Evan walked in, the room rose to its feet, not out of politeness, but out of acknowledgement, out of power. Jonathan Reed, the managing partner, stepped forward to shake his hand. "Mr. Mitchell, I believe the whole country owes you a thank you." Evan answered calmly, "I do not need thanks. I just want things to be right." They sat down. The meeting ran with sharp focus, but every glance kept drifting toward Evan as if he carried the future of cybersecurity on his shoulders. Jonathan began. "We want to increase our investment to $800 million, and we want a long-term strategic partnership." Kayla's eyes widened. That was double the original proposal. Jonathan leaned forward. "Western Skies proved something this morning. There is no system more secure than the one you built." Evan did not smile. "I did not build Atlas to destroy anyone. I built it so no one could destroy us." Jonathan held his gaze. "Which is exactly why we are choosing you." The meeting ended with a firm handshake. It was not just an $800 million deal. It was a declaration Orion Cyber Systems was no longer a company. It was now the fortress of an entire industry. The media explosion. The moment Evan stepped out of the building, dozens of reporters swarmed forward. "Mr. Mitchell, how do you feel about being called the man who grounded the skies? Did you activate Atlas Protocol this morning? Do you think your actions set a dangerous precedent? Do you have a message for Western Skies?" Is it true you just closed a deal close to $1 billion? Evan stopped, the sharp, hungry eyes of the press fixed on him, waiting for a statement that could become a national headline. He straightened his collar, stood tall, and finally spoke. Today is not a story about me. The crowd froze. Today is a story about how a system treats the people it believes have no power. I did not ground those planes for revenge. I did it to make sure no one could abuse authority without consequences. He looked directly into the camera. I had leverage. I had power. But many people do not. A reporter fired a question. Do you see yourself as a hero? Evan replied without hesitation. Heroes are the people without power who endure this every day. Silence rippled through the entire press field. Evan continued, if an airline can treat me this way, someone with status and influence, imagine what they have done to others for years. Then he stepped back and delivered the line that made the entire nation go still. I do not want the system to apologize because of who I am. I want it to apologize because I am a human being. He turned and walked away. No more answers, no compromises, only truth left behind like a blade cutting straight into the heart of the country. At Western Sky's headquarters, the purge. While Evan traveled across Seattle, Dallas fell into chaos. Western Skies was collapsing from the inside. The board of directors met urgently for 8 straight hours. No one left their seat. A panicked CFO exclaimed, "The compensation costs will exceed $200 million. Our stock dropped 27%. If we do nothing, we lose the entire airline." Another board member shouted, "The media is not just talking about Evan Mitchell. They are digging up hundreds of complaints from black customers." The room erupted in blame, fear, shouting. Then Richard Langford stood up exhausted and hollowed out. His voice was low, steady, slicing each word. "We were wrong, and we will pay the price." He laid out the decisions. All staff involved were terminated immediately. 4 mid-level managers dismissed. 4 executives removed. The entire service process restructured. A chief equity officer hired. $35 million allocated to cultural reform. A third-party watchdog appointed. And full transparency within 60 days. The room froze. Someone asked, "Do we have any choice?" Richard replied, "No, because if we do not change, the sky will lock again. Not because of Atlas, but because of our passengers." 3 months later, back to the sky. 3 months passed. Some events fade. This one carved itself into history. Western Skies transformed, completely retrained crew, mandatory body cameras, transparent procedures, increased diversity, hiring complaints, down nearly 70% stock value, recovered beyond pre-crisis levels, customer rating at 4.8 out of 5. And their newly appointed chief equity officer, a black woman with 20 years of experience in systemic anti-discrimination, was praised nationwide as a historic move. All of it began because one man was removed from a first-class seat. Evan speaking at Tech Forward conference 3 months after the incident. Evan stood on the stage of Tech Forward in Chicago. The auditorium of 3,000 people was silent. The spotlight shone on him, simple yet powerful. He approached the podium, eyes sweeping across the crowd. He began with the quote now repeated across millions of posts. "When I was removed from that flight, the first thing I thought was, if I stay silent, others will endure this forever." He displayed a slide, Western Skies Reform Metrics. The power of technology is not in building systems. It is in forcing those systems to become just. The room was so quiet he could hear breathing. Evan continued. I did not want to stop the sky. I wanted to open it for others. His gaze deepened, not the look of a victor, but of a survivor. And I learned something. The greatest power is not control. It is choosing how to use it. We can destroy, or we can rebuild. The hall erupted in applause. Jonathan Reed watched from the front row with a respect that no investment could buy. Kayla stood behind the curtain, tears shining in her eyes. Final chapter. A new sky. A week later, Evan prepared for a new business trip. After long consideration, he chose Western Skies again. Not to test them, not to see if the reforms were real, but to prove that no one is defined forever by old mistakes. At the first-class counter, the agent greeted him warmly. Welcome back, Mr. Mitchell. It is our honor to serve you. No trembling, no fear, no excessive reverence, just respect. Evan nodded a small nod that carried the weight of a new chapter. As he walked down the jet bridge, afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass, reminding him this sky once closed against him. And he opened it not just for himself, but for countless others. He settled into his first-class seat, opened his laptop and looked out the window. On the runway below, dozens of Western Skies planes prepared for takeoff, secured by Orion systems, guided by new procedures, supported by a new culture, grounded in fairness. Evan closed his eyes and took a slow breath, then whispered just for himself. No one has the right to take the place you deserve. Not on the ground. Not in the sky. Engines thundered. The plane launched forward, and as it lifted into the air, the sky opened wide, wider than 3 months ago, wider than that fateful morning in Phoenix. The sky was no longer anyone's privilege, no longer a place to judge worth, no longer a place to define identity. The sky returned to what it was always meant to be, freedom, fairness, and a place that belongs to everyone. From the perspective of an expert in organizational power, human behavior, and the hidden mechanisms that drive modern systems, the story of Evan Mitchell reveals a truth we often avoid. Prejudice does not fade with time. It simply changes form. It slips through suspicious glances, through belittling tones, through procedures that appear harmless on the surface, until someone patient enough, calm enough, and strong enough stands up at the right moment and forces an entire system to confront itself. Evan did not change Western Skies through anger. He changed them through leverage, through preparation, through the ability to see the problem clearly and ask the question the world tries so hard to avoid: who pays the price when a system is wrong? And on that morning, for the first time, the answer was not the victim. It was the system that created the mistake. If this story makes you reflect on fairness, on real power, or on how each of us can spark change simply by speaking up at the right time, please like the video so this message can reach even farther. And if you want to follow more powerful journeys like Evan's journeys, where one person can change the entire sky, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next story. Before you leave the video, drop a very short comment, exactly 3 words, so I know how this story made you feel. Just one phrase: stop injustice.